The transport ship shook hard as it dropped through the atmosphere of Vareth Prime. Inside the hold, 46 cadets sat strapped to their seats, each one representing the best their species had to offer. There were Dralki, massive reptilian soldiers from heavy-gravity worlds, their thick scales the color of dried blood. There were Yanari, tall and thin with sharp feathers that could cut skin, their golden eyes always watching. There were Sorvathi, beings made of living crystal that glowed faintly blue, their minds faster than any computer. And there were others too, species with 4 arms, species with no eyes, species that breathe methane instead of oxygen. And then there was the human. Corporal Juno Marin sat in the back row. She was smaller than every other cadet on the ship. She had no scales, no claws, no armor plating on her skin. Her body was soft. Her teeth were flat. She had no venom, no telepathy, no ability to see in the dark. By every measure that mattered in the galaxy, she was the weakest thing on the transport. She did not seem to care. Juno sat with her hands folded on her lap, looking out the small window at the volcanic surface of Vareth Prime below. Rivers of orange lava cut through black rock. The sky was the color of a bruise. It was an ugly world, built for ugly work. This was the home of the Galactic Union Military Academy, the hardest officer training program in known space. Every cycle, hundreds of cadets arrived. Less than half would graduate. Some would not survive at all. The Drelki cadet sitting across from Juno was staring at her. His name was Rethik, and he was enormous, nearly 3 meters tall, with arms as thick as Juno's whole body. His yellow eyes were narrow with something between confusion and disgust. "You are the human," he said. It was not a question. "I am." "You are small." "I am." Rethik made a low rumbling sound in his chest. It was the Drelki way of showing disapproval. "I do not understand why they sent you. This is not a place for soft creatures." Juno smiled at him. It was a calm, easy smile. The kind of smile that did not belong on the face of someone walking into the most dangerous military training in the galaxy. "I guess we will find out," she said. The transport landed with a heavy thud. The rear doors opened, and hot air flooded the hold, thick with the smell of sulfur and ash. The cadets filed out into a wide courtyard made of black stone. Around them, the academy rose like a fortress. Sharp towers, reinforced walls, weapon emplacements on every roof. It was a machine designed to break people and rebuild whatever was left. Waiting for them in the center of the courtyard was Instructor Valak Roan. Valak was a Krathi, a species known across the galaxy for producing the finest soldiers. He had 4 arms, each one ending in clawed hands that could crush metal. His face was covered in old scars. One of his eyes was artificial, glowing a faint red. He had fought in 3 wars and survived things that should have killed him many times over. He looked at the new cadets the way a butcher looks at livestock. "Welcome to Vareth Prime," he said. His voice was deep and cold. "Most of you will fail. Some of you will be carried out on medical transports. A few of you will earn the right to call yourselves officers of the Galactic Union. I do not care which group you fall into. The Academy will decide." His red eye swept across the rows of cadets and stopped on Juno. Something moved across his face. It might have been amusement. It might have been pity. "This cycle, we have a first," he said. "A human, species 4491, admitted by order of the Union Senate." He paused. "I want you all to take a good look. Remember what you see. It will be educational." Juno did not flinch. She stood straight, hands at her sides, eyes forward. She felt every gaze in the courtyard fall on her like weight. After the briefing, the cadets were assigned to fire teams. Juno was placed in Fire Team Noctis. Her teammates were Rethik the Drelki, who had already made his opinion of her clear. There was Silly, a Yanari female with silver feathers and quick, nervous movements. And there was Dorn 7, a Sorvathi whose crystal body hummed with constant calculation. They stood together in their assigned quarters, a bare metal room with 4 bunks and nothing else. "I have run the numbers," Dorn 7 said. His voice sounded like glass tapping against glass. "Based on the human's physical profile, species data, and historical performance of similar-sized cadets, her probability of completing the full training program is 4.2%. "That high?" Rethik said. He was not joking. Silly tilted her head, studying Juno with her golden eyes. "I have never met a human before. I have read that your world is very dangerous. Predators, extreme weather, natural disasters, and yet you have no natural defenses." Juno dropped her bag on the bottom bunk and sat down. "That is mostly true," she said. "We made up for it in other ways." "What ways?" Silly asked. Juno reached into her bag and pulled out a pair of shoes. They were old and worn, the fabric faded, the soles thin from use. Running shoes. She set them by her bunk carefully, like they were something precious. "We just kept going," she said. The others did not understand what she meant. They would. Soon enough. That night, while the rest of the barracks slept, Juno lay awake on her bunk. She could hear Rethik's deep rumbling breaths. She could hear the faint hum of Dorn 7 in rest mode. Outside, the volcanic wind howled against the walls. She was afraid. She would not deny that. This place was built to destroy people far stronger than her. Every species here had some natural advantage. Armor, speed, strength, senses beyond anything a human could match. On paper, she had no business being here. But paper had never stopped a human before. Juno closed her eyes and thought about Earth. She thought about her grandmother, who had run marathons until she was 70 years old. She thought about the ancient hunters of the African plains, who chased animals across open ground for hours, for days, until the animal simply could not run anymore, and the human was still there, still coming, still moving forward on 2 stubborn legs. That was the secret. That was what no one here understood yet. In the morning, Commandant Velok's voice crackled over the barrack speakers. "All cadets report to the South Gate at 0500. Today, you face the Crucible March. 40 kilometers through the volcanic lowlands. Many of you will not finish." There was a pause. That is the point. Around her, cadets groaned, cursed, or went silent with fear. Rethik cracked his neck and bared his teeth. Silly's feathers flattened against her body. Dorn 7's crystal surface flickered with rapid calculations. Juno Marin pulled on her old running shoes, tied them tight, and stood up. The south gate opened at exactly 0500, and the heat hit them like a wall. Varath Prime's volcanic lowlands stretched out before the cadets in every direction. Black rock, orange rivers of cooling lava, and air so thick with sulfur and heat that it burned the lungs. The ground was uneven and sharp. Steam burst from cracks in the earth without warning. The sky above was dark with ash clouds, and the temperature was already climbing past what most species considered safe. Instructor Velok stood at the gate. He wore no pack and carried no water. He would not be marching with them. He would be watching from above, in a monitoring craft, tracking every cadet's biometrics on a screen. 40 kilometers, he said. No vehicles, no assistance. If you fall, the medic drones will extract you and your training will be evaluated accordingly. There is no shame in falling. He paused and looked out at the hellscape before them. There is only the truth of what you are. He stepped aside. The cadets began to march. For the first 5 kilometers, everyone was strong. The Draelki moved with heavy, confident steps, their thick legs built for punishing terrain. The Yen'erai were fast and light, darting ahead with graceful strides. The Sorvathi marched in perfect rhythm, their crystal bodies catching the dull glow of distant lava. Even the smaller species kept pace, fueled by adrenaline and pride. Juno walked among them. She was already sweating. Her skin was slick with it, and it ran down her face and soaked through her uniform. A Draelki cadet nearby wrinkled his nose at the smell. Humans leaked water when they got hot. It seemed like a flaw, a weakness. It was not. By kilometer 10, the heat began to do its work. The Yenari were the first to struggle. Their respiratory systems were designed for cool, thin mountain air. The thick, hot atmosphere of the lowlands clogged their breathing membranes and made every breath a fight. Silly was panting hard, her silver feathers pressed flat against her body, her beak open wide as she tried to pull enough oxygen from the poisoned air. The Sorvathi came next. Their crystalline bodies were beautiful and strong, but they had a fatal weakness: they could not shed heat. On their cool homeworld, this was never a problem. Here, on the edge of a volcanic field, their internal temperature climbed steadily, and tiny cracks began to spread across their surfaces like ice breaking on a frozen lake. Dorn 7's blue glow was flickering. And then, to everyone's shock, the Draelki began to fall. The great reptilian warriors were cold-blooded. Their bodies depended on external conditions to regulate their temperature. In the mild environments of the Academy grounds, they were powerful. But here, on superheated rock, their biology turned against them. Their muscles overheated. Their reaction times slowed. Their massive bodies, which were their greatest strength, became ovens, cooking them from the inside. Rethik was limping by kilometer 15. By kilometer 20, there was a crack in the bone of his left leg. A stress fracture from the heat-softened ground, pulling at his enormous weight. He gritted his teeth and kept walking, but every step was agony. The medic drones began to descend. One by one, cadets collapsed. Some simply sat down and could not get up. Others fell forward onto the sharp rocks and did not move until the drones lifted them away. By kilometer 20, a third of the class was gone. By kilometer 25, half. Up in the monitoring craft, Veilok watched the screens. Heart rates, body temperatures, blood chemistry, muscle fatigue. Every piece of data for every cadet, streaming in real time. His eyes moved from screen to screen with practiced efficiency. Then, he stopped. He looked at the human's data. Juno Marin's heart rate was high. Her body temperature was elevated to a level that would have killed most species. Lactic acid was flooding her muscles. Her feet were blistered. She was in real, significant pain, and she was not slowing down. Veilok leaned forward. He pulled up the human species file, a document he had read once and dismissed as unimpressive. Now, he read it again. Bipedal endurance locomotion, thermal regulation through perspiration, slow twitch muscle fiber dominance, psychological persistence under sustained physical stress. And there, at the bottom of the file, a single word that Veilok had never considered important before. Persistence. Humans were persistence predators. Long ago, on their little blue world, they had not hunted by being fast or strong. They had hunted by following, by walking and running after their prey for hours, for entire days, until the animal's body gave out from exhaustion, and the human was still there, still coming, still moving on two legs that simply refused to stop. Veilok looked back at the live feed. Juno was at kilometer 30. She was drenched in sweat, her face red, her breathing rough, but she was moving, and she was not alone. She had taken Rethik's pack. The massive Draelki had tried to refuse, but Juno had simply pulled it off his shoulders and added it to her own without a word. The extra weight made her steps heavier, but she did not complain. She walked beside him, matching his limping pace, steady as a heartbeat. Ahead of them, Silly was struggling to breathe. Juno reached her and began talking to her in a calm, quiet voice. She taught her a breathing pattern: in through the beak for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4. It was a simple human trick, something soldiers on Earth had used for centuries to control panic and manage oxygen. Silly followed the pattern, and her breathing steadied. Dorn 7 was overheating badly. Cracks covered his arms and chest, and his internal processors were beginning to shut down. Juno took her last water ration, the water she needed for herself, and poured it over his crystalline shell. The water hissed and steamed on contact, but it pulled just enough heat away to keep him functional. Dorn 7 looked at her with something that might have been surprise, though it was hard to tell, with a face made of crystal. They crossed kilometer 35 together. Fireteam Noctis, held together by the smallest, weakest member. The finish line appeared through the haze at kilometer 40. The cadets who had already finished, barely a quarter of the original group, watched in silence as Juno walked across the line with her team. Refik collapsed immediately, his massive body hitting the ground with a sound like a falling tree. Silly folded her legs beneath her and closed her eyes. Dorn 7 stood perfectly still, running emergency repair cycles. Juno stood among them, breathing hard, sweat dripping from every part of her body. She was shaking, her legs were screaming, every part of her hurt. She stretched her arms above her head. She bent down and touched her toes. She rolled her neck from side to side. Then she stood up straight and walked over to Instructor Velok, who had landed his craft near the finish line. "Instructor," she said. Her voice was rough but steady. "Permission to run the last 5 kilometers again. I would like to cool down." The courtyard went silent. Velok stared at her. He had trained cadets for 23 years. He had seen warriors from the most fearsome species in the galaxy break on this march. He had seen soldiers with 4 arms, soldiers with armored skin, soldiers who could lift 10 times their own weight, all of them brought to their knees by the crucible. And this small, soft, sweating creature wanted to go back and do it again, for fun. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He did not have words. Juno took his silence as permission. She turned around, broke into a light jog, and ran back into the volcanic lowlands alone. The cadets watched her go. Nobody spoke for a long time. That night, in the barracks, the members of Fireteam Noctis lay in their bunks. The room smelled of medical gel and exhaustion. Refik's leg was wrapped in a healing cast. Silly's breathing was still rough. Dorn 7's cracks were sealed with emergency bonding compound. Juno sat on her bunk, carefully unlacing her running shoes. Her feet were covered in blisters and raw skin, but she handled the shoes gently, like they were something alive. Refik watched her from across the room. The contempt that had been in his eyes on the transport ship was gone. Something else had taken its place. "Human," he said. Juno looked up. "What are you?" She thought about it for a moment, then she smiled. That same calm, easy smile from the transport. "Stubborn, mostly," she said. Refik stared at her for a long time. Then he made a sound in his chest. It was not the rumble of disapproval from before. It was different. Lower. Warmer. It was the Dralki sound for respect. The weeks that followed the Crucible March were designed to be worse. The Academy did not believe in rest. It believed in pressure, constant and increasing, applied until the weak points of every cadet were found and exposed. Combat training, survival exercises, tactical simulations, zero-gravity assault courses, live fire drills. Every day brought a new way to suffer, and every night brought only enough sleep to keep the cadets alive for the next morning. Cadets continued to wash out. Every few days, another bunk in the barracks would be empty, its occupant carried away by medic drones, or simply told to pack their things and go home. The Academy had no patience for those who could not keep up. Juno kept up. She was never the best at anything. In strength tests, Refik could lift 5 times what she could. In speed drills, Silly moved so fast, she was almost a blur. In tactical analysis, Dorn 7 could process a battlefield in the time it took Juno to blink. Every species at the Academy had some gift that made them naturally superior in at least one area. Juno had no gift. What she had was something the instructors had never measured before, because they had never needed to. She did not break. In the Cold Environment Survival module, the cadets were dropped on an ice moon with minimal supplies and told to survive for 3 days. The Ynnari, built for cool air, thrived at first, until the temperature dropped below what even they could handle and their feathers locked up with frost. The Draelki went sluggish within hours, their cold-blooded bodies shutting down in the frozen air. The Sorvathi became brittle and slow. Juno shivered. Her teeth chattered so hard she could barely speak. Her fingers turned white and then blue. Her body was screaming at her to stop, to lie down, to give up. Instead, her body did something remarkable. It adapted. Her blood vessels tightened to keep warmth in her core. Her muscles shook to generate heat. Her brain, flooded with stress chemicals, became sharper and more focused. She built a shelter from ice blocks, with hands she could barely feel, started a fire with shaking fingers, and kept her team alive through all 3 days. The medics were fascinated and slightly disturbed. In the sleep deprivation exercise, cadets were kept awake for as long as possible, while performing increasingly complex tasks. Most species had rigid sleep cycles. Their brains simply shut down after a certain number of hours without rest, like machines losing power. The Sorvathi lasted 28 hours. The Ynnari lasted 32. The Draelki, 40. Juno lasted 72. She did not do this by being immune to exhaustion. She was exhausted. Her eyes were red, and her hands trembled, and her thoughts moved like they were swimming through mud. But humans had a trick that no one at the Academy had seen before. Juno could close her eyes for 2 minutes, drop into a fragment of sleep, and wake up just functional enough to continue. She did this over and over, stealing tiny pieces of rest like a thief, never fully sleeping, but never fully stopping. By hour 60, she was the only cadet still on her feet. The instructors watched her stumble through the final tasks with a kind of horrified respect. But it was the pain tolerance assessment that truly shook them. Every cadet was subjected to controlled pain stimuli, increasing levels of discomfort designed to measure how each species responded to physical suffering. It was clinical, carefully monitored, and deeply unpleasant. Most species had predictable responses. Their bodies registered pain, sent distress signals to their brains, and their performance decreased in a neat, measurable line. Juno's results did not follow the line. At moderate pain levels, her performance actually improved. The medical officer, a Sorvathi named Vel 3, ran the test 3 times because he was certain the equipment was broken. It was not. Juno's brain, under stress and pain, was releasing endorphins, natural chemicals that blocked pain signals and produced a feeling that was close to pleasure. Her species had evolved to drug themselves during suffering. The worse things got, the better they felt. Vel 3 included a single note in his report. The humans are not brave. They are chemically incapable of knowing when to stop. Fireteam Noctis grew closer through the shared misery. Rethik, who had once called Juno a prey species, now positioned himself beside her in every exercise. Not to protect her, he had learned she did not need protection, but because she made him feel like he could keep going when his body wanted to quit. There was something about her presence, her refusal to stop, that was contagious. In the evenings, when training was done and the barracks were quiet, the two of them would sit together and talk. Silly was fascinated by humans, their history, their wars, their strange habit of running toward danger instead of away from it. Juno was fascinated by the Ynnari, their music, their sky cities, their belief that the wind carried the voices of the dead. Dorn 7 said little, as Sorvathi usually did. But one evening, without being asked, he announced that he had revised his estimate of Juno's survival probability. 97.6%, he said. Juno laughed. It was the first time Dorn 7 had heard a human laugh, and the sound made his crystal surface vibrate in a way he found surprisingly pleasant. Not everyone was pleased with Juno's success. Cadet Torek was a Krathi, the same species as Instructor Velok. He came from an elite military family, and he had been raised to believe that the Krathi were the supreme warriors of the galaxy. The idea that a soft, small, sweating human could survive the academy, could thrive in it, was an insult he could not accept. He began targeting Juno. Small things at first. A rigged obstacle in the assault course that was set too high for her to reach. A sparring partner in combat training who hit much harder than necessary. Equipment that was damaged or missing when Juno reached for it. Juno noticed. She said nothing. She adapted, found another route through the obstacle, took the hits, and got back up, made do without the equipment. Each time Torek tried to break her, she simply adjusted and kept moving forward. This made Torek angrier. The breaking point came during a tactical war game, a full-scale simulated battle between fire teams in the canyons south of the academy. Each team was given a flag to defend and tasked with capturing the enemy's flag. It was meant to test leadership, teamwork, and combat tactics. Torek's team was the strongest in the class. 4 elite warriors, all from heavy combat species, all handpicked by Torek for maximum aggression. They ambushed Fire Team Noctis in a narrow canyon pass, hitting them from 3 sides with suppressing fire and moving to encircle them. It was a textbook attack, overwhelming and efficient. It should have been a quick victory. Juno looked at the canyon walls. She looked at the positions of Torek's team. She looked at the open ground behind them. 3 kilometers of flat, exposed terrain with no cover. A killing field. No sane cadet would cross it. "I have a plan," she said. Rethik looked at the open ground. "That is not a plan. That is suicide." "It is both," Juno said. She was smiling again. "Give me 2 minutes, then hit them from the left." Before anyone could argue, Juno broke from cover and ran. She sprinted into the open ground, fully exposed, making herself the most obvious target on the field. Torek's team reacted exactly as she expected. They turned their fire toward the easy kill, shifting their formation to track the running human. Juno ran. Suppression rounds hit the ground around her feet, kicking up dust and stone. One grazed her arm, drawing a line of red across her skin. She did not slow down. She ran in a wide, curving path, pulling Torek's entire team out of their fortified position and into the open as they chased her, exactly the way a human ancestor would have lured a predator away from the tribe. 3 kilometers. Her lungs burned. Her legs screamed. Blood ran down her arm from the graze wound. She kept running. Behind Torek's abandoned position, Rethik, Silly, and Dorn 7 struck. They hit the exposed flank perfectly, capturing the flag in less than 30 seconds. The game was over. Juno jogged back to her team, breathing hard, bleeding and grinning. Torek stared at her from across the canyon, his 4 fists clenched, unable to understand how he had lost to a creature that should not have survived the first week. "Told you I like extra laps," Juno said. Up in the observation tower, Instructor Velok watched the replay of the war game on his screen. He watched the human run 3 kilometers through open fire, drawing an entire team out of position with nothing but her own body as bait. He watched her get hit and keep running. He watched her smile. He closed the file and opened a secure communication channel to Union High Command. The message was short. "We underestimated them." That same evening, a different kind of message arrived at the Academy. Intelligence reports, marked urgent, distributed to all senior instructors. The Netherrack Dominion, a hostile empire from beyond the galactic rim, had broken through the Union's outer border defenses. Colony worlds were burning. The fleet was mobilizing. The war that everyone had feared for a generation was here. Veloc gathered the surviving cadets in the main hall. His face was harder than usual, which was saying something. "Your training is being accelerated," he said. "Graduation has been moved up. You will see real combat sooner than any of us planned." He paused and looked at them, battered, bruised, exhausted, but still standing. "Be ready." In the back of the hall, Fireteam Noctis stood together. Rethic cracked his knuckles. Silly's feathers stood on edge. Dorn 7's crystal surface pulsed with rapid calculations. Juno Marin took a slow breath and let it out. She looked down at her old running shoes, worn even thinner than before. She would need them soon. The transport dropped out of hyperspace, and through the viewport, Juno saw Sumnar Reach for the first time. It was a space station the size of a small city, built at the edge of Union territory, where the stars began to thin out and the dark between galaxies started. It was a border fortress, a trade hub, a home to 30,000 civilians and 5,000 military personnel. It was important. It was also on fire. Huge sections of the station's outer hull had been torn open, venting atmosphere into the void. Emergency lights flashed red through the breaches. Debris floated everywhere, pieces of metal, frozen clouds of oxygen, and other things that Juno tried not to look at too closely. Around the station, Union warships exchanged fire with dark, organic-looking vessels that moved through space like living things. The Netherrock had arrived. "All cadets, combat stations," Veloc's voice came through the speakers on the transport, calm and steady as always. "You are being deployed as emergency reinforcements to Sumnar Reach. The station's defensive lines are failing. Civilian evacuation is underway but not complete. Your orders are simple. Hold your assigned positions until the main fleet arrives. Estimated arrival time is 1 hour. 1 hour. Juno had run longer than that on plenty of mornings. She could do an hour. The transport docked hard against the station, and the cadets poured out into chaos. The interior of Sumnar Reach was a nightmare. The lights were failing, flickering between red emergency glow and total darkness. Alarms screamed from every direction. The air was thick with smoke and the sharp smell of melting metal. And everywhere, moving through the ruined corridors like a flood of dark water, were the Netherrack. Juno had studied them in briefings, but seeing them in person was different. They were horrible. Each drone was roughly the size of a large dog, covered in black biomechanical armor that seemed to grow from their bodies like a shell. They had too many legs and too many eyes, and they moved with a speed and coordination that made Juno's stomach turn. They were not individuals. They were extensions of a hive mind, a single intelligence controlling thousands of bodies with perfect, terrible efficiency. They did not retreat. They did not hesitate. They did not feel pain or fear. They simply came, wave after wave, pouring through every breach and crack in the station like water finding its way through stone. Fireteam Noctis was assigned to Corridor 7 Black, a wide passage that connected the station's outer ring to the civilian docking bays where evacuation ships were loading. If Corridor 7 Black fell, the Netherrack would reach the civilians. It was that simple. They reached their position and began building defenses. Rethic flipped heavy metal barriers into place with his massive arms. Silly climbed to a high position where her sharp eyes could spot incoming threats. Dorn 7 connected to the station's damaged systems and began rerouting power to their section's few remaining turrets. Juno organized the scattered soldiers already in the corridor, a mix of wounded veterans and terrified support staff, into something that looked like a defensive line. The Netherrack came within minutes. The first wave hit like a wall. Dozens of drones poured around the corner and charged directly into the barricade, climbing over each other in their rush to reach the defenders. The corridor filled with the sound of weapons fire, screaming, and the horrible clicking noise the drones made as they communicated with each other. Rethik stood at the center of the barricade like a mountain, firing his heavy weapon with one arm and crushing drones with his other three when they got too close. Silly fired from above with terrifying accuracy, every shot finding a weak point in the drone's armor. Dorn 7 controlled the turrets with his mind, calculating firing angles faster than any computer. Juno fought beside them. She was not as strong as Rethik, or as fast as Silly, or as precise as Dorn 7. But she was there, firing her weapon, dragging wounded soldiers to safety, plugging gaps in the line with her own body when necessary. A drone broke through the barricade and leaped at her. She shot it twice, and when it kept coming, she hit it with the butt of her rifle until it stopped moving. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was hammering. She was terrified. She kept fighting. The first wave broke against their defenses, leaving a carpet of destroyed drones on the corridor floor. But there was no time to celebrate. The second wave came, and it was larger. Then the third, larger still. The Netherrack did not tire. They did not run out of bodies. They just kept coming. 30 minutes passed. Dorn 7 took a direct hit from a drone's acid spray, melting through the crystal of his left arm. He sealed the damage and kept fighting with one arm. Silly caught a piece of shrapnel in her wing and fell from her perch. Juno caught her before she hit the ground and helped her to a position where she could still shoot. Rethik was bleeding from a dozen wounds, but refused to acknowledge any of them. 45 minutes. The barricade was failing. There were too many drones and not enough defenders. The soldiers Juno had organized were falling one by one, some killed, some wounded too badly to continue. The turrets ran out of power. The corridor was filling with smoke and the smell of burned metal and worse things. 50 minutes. Almost there. Almost 1 hour. Then the comms crackled, and a voice from Fleet Command spoke the words that Juno had been dreading. All stations, be advised. Fleet arrival delayed. New estimated time, 2 hours. Repeat, 2 additional hours. All units fall back to inner defensive ring. Corridor 7 Black is to be abandoned. 2 more hours. Juno looked down the corridor toward the civilian docking bays. Through the smoke she could see people, families, children, the old and the sick, still filing onto evacuation ships. The loading was not complete. If they abandoned Corridor 7 Black, the Netherrack would reach those people in minutes. Command, this is Corporal Marin. Corridor 7 Black. Civilian evacuation is not complete. Requesting permission to hold position. The reply was immediate. Negative, Corporal. The position is not defensible for 2 hours. Fall back. Juno looked at her team. Rethik, bleeding and exhausted. Silly, clutching her wounded wing. Dorn 7, missing an arm. Every one of them looked at her and waited. She turned off her comm. I am staying, she said. Anyone who wants to leave should leave now. No one will think less of you. Rethik pulled a fresh power cell from his belt and slammed it into his weapon. I am not leaving. Silly shifted her injured wing and steadied her rifle. Neither am I. Dorn 7's remaining arm recalibrated his weapon. My calculations suggest this is inadvisable. I am staying. She turned to the other soldiers in the corridor. The broken, bleeding, exhausted remnants of a dozen different units and a dozen different species. She did not give a speech. She was too tired for speeches. She simply said, the civilians are not on the ships yet. I am going to stay here until they are. You can stay, or you can go. One by one, they stayed. A wounded Krathi soldier with 2 broken arms. A Yanari medic who had run out of medical supplies. A pair of Sorvathi engineers who had never fired a weapon before today. And then, from the back of the group, a familiar figure pushed forward. Torak. His armor was cracked, and his face was bloody, and the arrogance that had always burned in his eyes was gone. In its place was something raw and simple. He locked eyes with Juno and nodded once. He stayed. The next 2 hours were the longest of Juno Marin's life. The Netherrack came, and came, and came. The defenders of Corridor 7, Black, fought with everything they had, and when they had nothing left, they fought with their hands and their teeth and the sheer stubborn refusal to take one step backward. Juno moved through the line like a heartbeat, always where the fighting was worst, always pulling someone back to their feet, always finding one more reason to hold on for one more minute. She was hit 3 times. A piece of shrapnel buried itself in her shoulder. A drone's claw opened a gash across her ribs. A blast knocked her off her feet and cracked 2 of her ribs. She got up every time. Her body screamed at her to stop, and her brain flooded her with chemicals that turned the pain into something she could carry, and she kept going. Because that was what humans did. They kept going. The fleet arrived 123 minutes later. Union warships burned through the Netherrock vessels in orbit, and fresh troops stormed the station in waves, pushing the drones back, corridor by corridor. When the reinforcements reached Corridor 7 Black, they found it still held, barely. The barricade was destroyed. The floor was covered in the remains of hundreds of Netherrock drones. The defenders were broken and bloody, and some of them were not moving anymore. Juno was on her knees in the center of the corridor, her rifle empty, her hands red, her breathing shallow and ragged. She had not slept in 31 hours. She had not stopped fighting in over 3. Medics rushed to her. As they lowered her onto a stretcher, she looked up and saw Instructor Veloc standing in the corridor entrance. His face was unreadable, but his 4 hands were clenched tight at his sides. It came out crooked and weak and perfect. "How many laps was that?" she whispered. Then her eyes closed, and the medics carried her away. Behind her, the last evacuation ship detached from the docking bay, full of civilians who were alive because a human had refused to leave. Juno woke up in a hospital bed on a Union medical ship, and the first thing she felt was pain. It came from everywhere at once. Her cracked ribs, her torn shoulder, the deep gash across her side, and 100 smaller cuts and bruises that covered her body like a map of everything she had survived. The medical gel coating her wounds was cool and tingling, working to repair the damage, but healing took time, even with galactic technology. She turned her head and found she was not alone. Rethik was in the bed next to her, his massive body covered in bandages and healing patches. One of his arms was in a suspension cast. His scales had lost some of their color, faded from deep red to a tired pink. But he was alive, and when he saw Juno looking at him, he made that low, warm sound in his chest, the one that meant respect. Silly was 2 beds down. Her wing was wrapped in a regeneration frame that hummed softly as it rebuilt the damaged feathers and bone. She looked smaller without her wings spread, more fragile, but her golden eyes were bright and clear. Dorn 7 was not in a bed. He was standing in the corner, his body connected to a repair station by a dozen thin cables. His left arm was gone, replaced by a temporary framework of metal and wire, while a new crystal limb was grown. His surface was covered in sealed cracks, like a vase that had been broken and put back together, but his blue glow was steady. "You are awake," Dorn 7 said. "Good. I had calculated a 91% chance of your recovery, but the remaining 9% was causing me a degree of discomfort I had not previously experienced." "He was worried about you," Silly translated. "We all were." Juno smiled. It hurt her ribs, but she did it anyway. The days that followed were filled with rest, recovery, and news. The Battle of Somnar Reach was over. The Netherrack had been driven back from the station and pushed beyond the border. The Union fleet, once fully assembled, had delivered a decisive blow that bought the outer colonies time to fortify. It was not the end of the war. The Netherrack would come again. But it was a victory. A real one. And at the center of every report, every news broadcast, every military analysis, was Corridor 7 Black. The story spread across the Union like fire. A group of cadets fresh from the academy, holding an impossible position for 3 hours against endless waves of Netherrack drones. Veterans who had fought in a dozen campaigns said it was one of the most remarkable defensive stands in modern military history. Tactical analysts studied the battle data and wrote papers about it. News networks ran features on the brave defenders of the corridor. But the detail that captured the imagination of the entire galaxy was simpler than tactics or strategy. It was the detail that a human, a small, soft, sweating human with no claws and no armor and no natural weapons, had refused to retreat, had turned off her comm when ordered to fall back, had stood in a ruined corridor and asked who wanted to stay, and then had fought for 3 hours straight, wounded and bleeding, until the last civilian ship was safe. The Union Senate requested a full briefing on human military capabilities. When the data was presented, persistence predation, endurance running, thermoregulation, adrenaline response, endorphin-mediated pain suppression, psychological stubbornness under extreme conditions, the senators sat in silence for a long time. "You are telling me," said the Yanari senator, a dignified old male with fading silver feathers, "that this species evolved on a death world, has no natural defenses, and compensates by simply refusing to die?" "That is an accurate summary, Senator," said the military advisor. "And we gave them space travel." "Yes, Senator." The Yanari senator leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. "Well," he said quietly, "that is both wonderful and terrifying." Juno and her team were released from the medical ship 3 weeks after the battle. They were transported back to Verith Prime for the graduation ceremony. The ceremony that had been meant to happen after months more training, now accelerated by war. The academy looks the same: black stone, sharp towers, hot wind carrying the smell of sulfur, but it felt different. The cadets who walked its halls now carried themselves differently. They had seen real combat. They had lost friends. They had learned things about themselves that no training exercise could teach. The graduation ceremony was held in the main hall, the same room where Velok had told them their training was being accelerated. The surviving cadets stood in formation, wearing dress uniforms for the first time. There were gaps in the lines, empty spaces where cadets who did not make it back should have been standing. Nobody looked at the gaps. Everybody felt them. Commandant Velok stood at the podium. He looked older than he had at the start of the training cycle. Not physically. Krathi aged slowly, but in his eyes. He had sent children into battle, and not all of them had come back. He gave a short speech about duty and sacrifice. It was a good speech, well practiced, the kind of speech military commanders had been giving since the first wars on the First Worlds. When he finished, he did something unprecedented. He asked Juno to speak. There was a murmur through the hall. Cadets exchanged glances. A first-year cadet addressing the graduation assembly was unheard of. A human doing it was impossible. Juno walked to the podium. She was still healing. She moved carefully, favoring her injured side, but she walked with her back straight and her eyes forward. She stood behind the podium and looked out at the faces before her. Dralki, Yenari, Sorvathi, Krathi, and a dozen other species. Warriors, all of them. Survivors. She had not prepared a speech. She took a breath and spoke plainly. "I know what you all thought when you first saw me," she said. "I know because I would have thought the same thing. I am small. I am soft. I have no armor, no claws, no venom. By every standard in this galaxy, I should not be standing here. She paused. The hall was completely silent. On my world, a long time ago, my ancestors survived not because they were the strongest or the fastest. They survived because they could do one thing that no other creature on our planet could do. They could keep going. When every other animal had to stop, to rest, to cool down, to recover, the human kept running. Not fast, not gracefully, just forward, always forward. She looked at Refik, standing tall despite his healing arm. At Silly, her wings still wrapped but her eyes shining. At Dorn 7, his new crystal arm glowing faintly beside the cracked surface of his body. "You can outrun us in a sprint," Juno said. "All of you. But we will follow you to the edge of the galaxy. And when you are too tired to take another step, we will still be coming." She stopped. She thought about saying more, but it did not feel necessary. She nodded once and stepped away from the podium. The silence held for 3 seconds. Then Refik began to pound his fist against his chest, the Dralki salute. Silly raised her wing in the Yenari gesture of honor. Dorn 7's crystal surface flared bright blue, and then the whole hall erupted, every species and every cadet saluting in their own way, a chorus of respect in 40 different traditions. Veilok watched from the side of the stage. His 4 hands were clasped behind his back, and his scarred face showed nothing. But his artificial eye, the one that glowed red, flickered once. If anyone had asked him, he would have said it was a malfunction. In the months that followed, the Union began actively recruiting humans for frontline service and command positions. The word spread through military channels, and then through the wider galaxy. The humans were real, and they were exactly as stubborn and unkillable as the stories said. The Netherrack Dominion noticed, deep in their territory, in the organic computing cores that served as the hive mind's central intelligence, the data from Somnar Reach was analyzed. Every frame of combat footage, every biological scan, every tactical decision was processed and cross-referenced. The hive mind had conquered hundreds of species across dozens of galaxies. It had a threat classification system that ranked every known civilization by their danger level. Species 4491, humans, had been classified as negligible. Soft bodies, short lifespans, no natural weapons, late arrival to space travel. The lowest possible threat rating. The classification was updated. The new entry read, Species 4491, humans, homeworld, Earth, classification, persistence predators, distinguishing traits, extreme endurance, environmental adaptability, psychological resistance to despair, anomalous pain tolerance, pack bonding behavior with non-human species, threat assessment, apex priority, strategic recommendation, do not engage in prolonged conflict. They do not stop. The hive mind processed this assessment and for the first time in its ancient existence, felt something it had no classification for. It would take a human to give it a name. The feeling was fear. 1 year later, a new class of cadets arrived at the academy on Verath Prime. They filed out of the transport ship into the hot, sulfur-smelling air and stood in the courtyard, nervous and trying not to show it. Among them were a dozen humans, men and women of different sizes and shapes, all of them soft and clawless and completely unremarkable to look at. A young Dralki cadet stood next to one of them and looked down with wide yellow eyes. The human was a full meter shorter than him, and probably weighed a third as much. The Dralki could not imagine how this creature would survive the first week. Then, in the early morning light, before the briefing had even started, the humans began to jog. Not because they were told to, not because it was required. They just started running, easy and loose, around the perimeter of the courtyard, talking and laughing as they went. The Dralki cadet turned to his instructor, a broad-shouldered Krathi with a healing scar across his face and a look in his eyes that said he had seen things that most people could not imagine. "Is it true?" the young Drelki asked. "What they say about the humans?" The instructor, Captain Rethick, graduate of the Academy, defender of Corridor 7 Black, and the first Drelki in history to request a permanent human liaison on his command staff, watched the humans run. He bared his teeth in a wide, deliberate expression that looked unnatural on a reptilian face. He had learned it from a friend. It was a smile. Every word, he said. Somewhere on the far side of the track, in the shadow of the Academy's black towers, a woman in worn-out running shoes was still running. Not because she had to, not because anyone was watching, but because she was human, and humans did not stop.